So welcome everybody. This is an interview I've been really looking forward to doing. It's been a long time coming. The first time that I heard of Stuart McHardy was way back when I was back in college, and my final year project was on the Pictish symbol stones. Fast forward 100 years, and I was in Edinburgh to celebrate Belton back in 2018, I think, and I stumbled across a presentation that Stuart was conducting at the library, and it was called Stones of the Ancestors. So it's a really serendipitous connection. So went in there and was totally blown away by their presentation, got super excited, got very fangirlish about it, because it was the first time that I'd come across anybody that was linking prehistoric Neolithic rock art, which was my current obsession, and moving forward through the Pictish symbol stones, which had been a previous obsession, to talking about the Eightfold Year, which I was currently teaching as part of a programme that I was running. So you can see the threads there and how excited I got. What happened was I ended up taking Stuart's Geomythography of Scotland course, which was held at Edinburgh Uni last year, was the session that I did in 2019. And I was patiently waiting on the publication of the book that was presented in the talk that I had visited at the library in Edinburgh. And here is the book. It's called The Stones of the Ancestors, Unveiling the Mystery of Scotland's Ancient Monuments. And this is one of them. So without further ado, Stuart, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm
Absolutely,
just going
my pleasure.
Give a wee quick rundown of your bio here, which will be better introduce you, I think, than what I would be able to do. So you're a man of many bunnets, as we say. Stuart McHardy is a writer, musician, folklorist, storyteller and poet, and has lectured on many aspects of Scottish history and culture, both in Scotland and abroad. Combining the roles of a scholar and performer gives McHardy an unusually clear insight into tradition. That's quite hard to say. As happy singing old ballads as analysing ancient legends, he's held such posts as Director of the Scots Language Resource Centre and President of the Pictish Art Society. McHardy is a prolific author and has had several books published. I can testify to that because I think I've got maybe nearly all of them. I haven't quite read all of them. I've not quite finished all of them, I have to say. But yeah, I think I've pretty much got all of them. So does that about sum you up then?
Aye, I suppose. But have you got all 40?
Oh no, well I definitely haven't. Do you know what? I haven't got the pub guides.
Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. They're out of date.
So anyway, this book was a long time coming as far as I was concerned, and I finally got the email to tell me it was in stock, and got it, I think, just as lockdown happened here with all of this craziness.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get you on so that we can get people interested in this book, because I think it's quite outstanding in terms of what it shows us. So the first question I've got for you is, can you describe what it's about?
Basically, it's a combination of my work, which is really into the oral tradition and ideas that have come down through the oral tradition, and how that relates to the landscape and ancient monuments, and Dougie's lifelong study of ancient monuments, where he has been measuring the solar and lunar alignments that are intrinsic to so many of them. But over the years, he also began to realise that a great deal of the folklore attached to these sites had the potential to tell us more about them. And we've known each other for 30 years, and we were just talking about it because we occasionally meet up and talk about these things. And we realised that we were working almost completely in parallel. So we thought, well, as you do, let's do a book.
Yeah. And the way that the book's set out, there's a kind of interpretation section.
Mm-hmm.
and then it goes on to give specific information about specific locations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's necessary to do that because one of the things that Dougie's very, very keen on making clear is that too much of modern archaeoastronomy, as it's developed, is focused down on measurement of a particularly, how can we put it, technical kind of slant, that people are focusing all the time down on the astronomy. And some people have done an awful lot of work on trying to pin alignments down to specific stars at specific dates and all this kind of thing. And Doogie, having been at this virtually all of his life, really wants people to realize this is not what it's about. It is actually about the focus on the solar and lunar. This is what's underlying all of it. And it's not just here, obviously. This is worldwide. It's just that because of the nature of Scottish culture, we can find out a great deal about these that previously people hadn't really guessed.
Right, right. Because when I speak to other folk about this, particularly people who are Scottish and were educated in Scotland, they are really surprised when I say that we have this continuity of culture from way back when, and you know, these people will have even read Maria Gimbutas's work. You know, they will be aware of old Europe and the goddess focus and religions, but they just think here it's been completely broken.
Yeah, that's partially because, well, I'd say it's actually mainly because of the notion that all Scottish culture emanated from Ireland, which is it's just utter and complete nonsense. Yeah. But this suited the church to put forward this idea, and that plus a series of historical accidents called invasions has meant that we have very little original, literary material of our own. So it's basically there's been an inability to see what's there. And a reliance on external models and external ideas, while all the time there was plenty of stuff here, it just wasn't being seen.
Right, right. And I think that people who go to visit, particularly these ancient monuments, right, which are super popular, and whatever kind of motivation there is for going to see them, everybody knows these are really significant.
Oh, yeah.
And they're telling us something.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a great mystery about what is it that they're telling us, and there's all sorts of different ideas because, the reality is, well, we'll never know for sure, but there are clues.
There are more than clues. There are certain aspects to this that are only now becoming clear. I mean, there's a lot happening archaeologically in Scotland at the moment. There is. We're beginning to, at last, look at our own culture. This is something that has not been done since the Union. I mean, there has been a deliberate suppression of Scottish culture. But one of the things that we talk about in the book, and that I'm talking about increasingly through geomythography, is the notion of localisation. And this is the fact that every one of, just take the megalithic structures, all the megaliths are clearly of a type, but they're all unique. Yeah. They are of their own place. They are of their own people. They are of their own culture. And this is paralleled absolutely 100% in the oral tradition, where when you have the big stories of Finnecool or Arthur or whatever, they're common over wide areas, they're always told within the local landscape because that's what makes them work. Right. Things are part of a wider culture, but they are localized. And this is how the culture survives.
And absolutely, and this is where your storytelling experience and your understanding and research of all the myths and legends really helps in this understanding, because you can see these common stories told in different ways.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking at that from where I come from in my background, it was like there was always a dissatisfaction that things aren't saying the one story, right? We're not, you know, all of these seeming discrepancies, which are just geographical variations, are proving that, you know, that it's not true in some way. And to me now, that just seems like a really back to front way of going about it. But I can see why I've ended up like that, because of the way that my education has led me
Yes.
to get to one specific authoritarian literary source.
Yes.
You know, and that's, yeah, and it's heartbreaking for me to have spent so much of my adult life in that place.
I can understand that, but the other thing in all of this is that for instance, I came across a book just maybe 10 years ago. It was written in 1972, called A Midsummer Eve's Dream, and by an Australian poet called Hope. And in it, he was actually going over a lot of the ground that I had to go and dig through again through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he'd done all the work. But because we have had this blind spot towards our own culture, I wasn't even aware it existed.
Yeah.
And when I did find it, I was, well, let's put it this way. It was lovely to see that somebody else was seeing things the same way I was. But my God, if I'd found him, it would have saved me a lot of work.
Right. Right.
So there is stuff out there. And as we are gathering this material in, you keep finding that other people have known bits and pieces of this. It's just that because it is partially because it's localized, but partially because it's Scottish. I'm sorry I've got to say this, but partially because it's Scottish, it has been denigrated and downgraded.
Yeah.
And it's just time to sort it out, basically.
Yeah.
As I would
Absolutely. Say. Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because I see the parallels, and you were director of the Scots Language Resource Association, and last night I was watching a programme on the old BBC, believe it or not, but it was called Rebel Tongue. It was the young guy from Dundee who's really passionate about bringing the Scots language. I think he does, like, he's in his day job, he does things like he visits prisons and things to get people talking in their language. But they were reading out some quite dramatic stuff from the education policies back in, was it in the 40s or something? And, you know, they were talking about the Scots language being unsuitable for education, right? So we were drummed out. But one of the astonishing things is the level of Scots still spoken by folk in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a parallel in that when you're saying that, you know, that the information has always been there, there's stuff been there, but we haven't recognised it in the same way that most folk who speak Scots didn't recognise it's a language.
Yeah, but it's who is the culture for and who holds on to the culture. And it's an unfortunate thing, but because of the way history has developed over the past few hundred years, we have inherited a notion from elsewhere that effectively culture is something that you buy in. No, culture is something that comes from you and your ancestors. It's something that has grown over time. And the people that know about the things are the people that live in places. I mean, I have been told all sorts of amazing things by folk that didn't even know that what they knew was important, because it was just a story my gran told me,
right?
But they didn't realise how important and how old this could be.
Yeah.
And it's only when you begin to realise that we have to speak to the people to find out what the people's culture is, that you realise that the scholarly traditions of the land have maybe not helped us too much.
It's true.
I have to be careful what I say, because I'm still, a teaching fellow at the university.
Exactly.
And they don't like me going too far with this.
But there is the hard evidence there. I've come through an education system that was primarily in Scotland and knew so little, and yet had gravitated towards always. And I always talk about the Scarabrae dramatisation at primary school just blew me away. And my interest was there. And then we did all sorts of other stuff. And then at college, when we were talking about symbols and communication, Pictish symbol stones were there. And then I left it all behind and did a whole ween of stuff in terms of my own, self-education, self-learning was about world mythology, because it seemed that was really important to know, which I think obviously it is, but not at the expense of thinking that you didn't have any to learn.
Well, this was basically what we were told, that there was nothing here to know. And it's the exact opposite. There's absolutely loads and loads of stuff. And of course, it was reflective of, other cultures. I mean, by the time people arrived here 14,000 years ago, they already had highly developed cultures and they brought their ideas with them. But things have survived here. And it is that continuity of survival that I think it is the key to understanding this. And it's something that, from the point of view of future generations, there's been one really good development in this within the curriculum for excellence, which is not perfect, I know that. But one of the things they are talking about there is developing an understanding of history by using local material. Root people in where they are, and they will learn better. And this, I think, is what we have to keep doing in Scotland. We have to keep looking and realising that the stories that we've got here are our stories and they're as valid as anybody else's anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just common sense. It's absolutely just common sense. So in terms of making this book, it seems to me to be really quite key in the work that you're doing these days with geomythography, that this was part of that library of writing that you have and are continuing to put out.
It's very much so. And it's also, although I haven't learned an awful lot from Dougie in the sense of being able to go out and do my own surveys, working with him has concentrated both our thinking on interpretations of the landscape that are quite dramatic. And it's also, we're in the situation where, and I think this is true of all proper scholarship, is once you begin to really discover things, what you're actually finding is new questions. And the whole alignment thing has been very important, because obviously that's where the hard information in the book is. But we're actually beginning to realise that the alignments maybe stretch further. I mean, culturally, I don't mean physically, culturally, than we had thought of. And just to give you an example of what this may lead to, there's been this big discovery at Riney on Tapa North, where Gordon Noble's found possibly as many as 4,000 people. Well, that's great. Doesn't surprise me in the least. But one of the things I'm certainly beginning to think about, because of the way that the alignments of folks and how much material is about hilltops. We have always studied hilltops because of what's built on them. The belief patterns associated with them and the stories linked to them actually show that significance may well predate anything structural, and that the hills themselves may have been used communally for a heck of a long time. I mean, thousands of years before anybody built anything on them. And how you would find this out, I'm not exactly sure, but I suspect there may be evidence hidden in amongst what they're finding that could be of much earlier dates, like just simple fire pits. Were people up there lighting fires long before they put up any structures? Probably.
Yeah.
And if so, for how long?
Yeah.
And it is that awareness of the functionality of places like that within the local culture that makes you start asking other questions. And the whole point of doing the geomythographical stuff is to actually start coming up with new questions, that hopefully the archaeologists will pay attention to.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, immediately as you're saying that, I'm recognising from doing the work with you that one of the ways that we can start to understand what might be below there is to listen to the stories, search out the knowledge that people have. Part of the geomythographic process is that you look at place names as well as alignments. We're looking at the stories and those associations, and they might even just be wee fragments of information. That, you know, even before any kind of archaeological digging, or, you know, all the new techniques that they're using goes on, we can use these techniques that you've developed, you know, in association to find out more information. So that then applies to any location where there is some kind of, you know, I'm thinking one of the things I immediately wanted to do, my on hold geomythographic project is at the Old Wives' Lifts.
Right.
And I really, you know, that's a place it's not too far away from me. It's half an hour drive, so it's really easy to get there. And it's quite astonishing.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful.
Right. So immediately I'm finishing that book and I'm like, right, I want to produce the same. I want to produce a whole big heap of information about that. And that's, I guess, what people can do after reading this book and the geomythography book that you have coming out at some point.
Sometime.
Yeah.
Well, also one of the things that is important that I've realised over the years is that if you can go to these places mob-handed, not necessarily 100 of you, but like 3 or 4 people going is a lot more helpful than one person going, because you talk about things, you see things differently, you exchange ideas, you're acting like a small community, if you like, around these places. And it leads to the potential for discovering stuff that might not otherwise be seen. And apropos of that, one of the things on the back burner is that Doogie and I have, between us, come up with maybe, it's only about 4 or 5 so far, but we have come up with what appear to be symbolic representations of eyes on extremely important sites. And of course, symbolically, you know, there was all that work done on the eye as a symbol of the goddess. But this is pairs of eyes. And we've got them in some very, very interesting and dramatic places. And it's like nobody's noticed up till now. But because we're touring all these sites and all the rest of it, if we get to, as I say at the moment, it's only about 4 or 5, but if I can start finding more of these other sites, and then suddenly, well, there's something else going on that nobody noticed. And it's building up patterns of repeated cultural involvement in places that is important in all of this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm super excited about that. The eye for many years was one of my symbols. Before I kind of let go of the hand and the eye were the 2 symbols. And I let go of them for the, you know, trying to just deal with what turns out to be solar symbols. This is you know, my personal fascination, but really excited about this. So we'll have to find out more about that for sure.
Oh yeah.
I want to be in your team. Let's form a team.
I have got a small team of assistants and a list of volunteers. There would have been a whole series of expeditions, but for this COVID stuff. But there are places, and there's one that really needs to be looked at. And if anybody cares to go there in the meantime and see what they can see, because I'm not getting there for a while, it'd be great. And that's round about Beatic, particularly Beatic Hill and the south side of Beatic Hill. There's all kinds of intriguing stuff there, and I am pretty sure that when I eventually get there, that there will be, how can I put this? Obvious shapes in the landscape that appear to reflect ancient belief.
Yeah.
Because Dougie and I are finding reclining figures, and they are all female. Which includes, of course, the Sleeping Warrior of Arden.
Okay.
Which most people don't realise is a woman.
Is a woman, not a...
Oh, aye. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Go into Glen Sannox and look up. And there's absolutely no doubt. That's no man.
I mean, this is the case that, again, I mean, I don't want to labour the point, but we have been, and you know, it's part of what you talk about quite often as well, is that we have this male-oriented, what you have, I think the phrase that you coined was kind of big men doing big things viewpoint on history, and from a very militaristic point of view, which means that that so much has been missed that was based in the feminine.
But this is where it has relevance, because in the world today we find a situation where the governments of the United Kingdom and America, in the face of the COVID pandemic, are encouraging private companies to develop a vaccine, whereas every other country is sharing its, the people are sharing the research. And that's quite obvious what you should do. Only men could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
This idea that, here's people are dying, we can make money. Now, that is, I'm sorry to say, but that is a masculine way of thinking. And it's been reinforced by the impetus within particularly the dominant religions of the world to suppress the idea of the feminine. Yeah. And I don't think there's any doubt about it whatsoever. And so it's relevant to the, how we're going to get out of this and what the world's going to be.
And this is a very extreme situation, but we can see that, for instance, one of the workshops I did recently was called Ancient Bodies, Ancient Wisdom, and it was about, we were looking at those goddess figures, but we're really extrapolating out the violence that on the landscape is, we can see that in the violence against women. We can see it in what's, even come down into women's violence against their own bodies. So the work that we can see that this work is not just for the sake of, the next big revelation about Scottish history. It's actually directly relevant to the world we live in today.
Oh, absolutely. And it's necessary, because if we don't sort things out, there'll not be any humans within a couple of hundred years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as plain as the nose on your face. But one of the things that, again, I keep coming back to, because of, I think, the nature of the research itself, is I keep coming back to this thing that if you're doing things locally and with your local community, that's where it starts. That's how everything should start. Nothing should be coming down from the top. Everything should be going up. And I think that's the way forward, actually, particularly in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, your stories, your language, your history, your culture are just the foundation of everything.
Yeah, because and it's getting people to appreciate themselves. And there's an odd thing in this, but it's one of the things Doogie's found out that I think is astounding, absolutely astounding. That we call the book Stones of the Ancestors, because to us it's absolutely clear that all of the great structures that were put up at least in memory, if not in reverence, of the inheritance of the ancestors, what the ancestors gave to carry on. And one of the things that he has been finding in them, an awful lot in the cairns in particular, is what he calls false portals. Now, these are alignments that are built in that nobody can see. And he has come up with a suggestion that they are there to directly address the ancestors. They know they're there. Succeeding generations might not, because it's only through the analysis now that we're actually finding them. But he's got them all over the place. And these are a built-in aspect of what to me is really, really important here, which is the observance of the continuity of culture and the awareness of that continuity. And it's like people throughout the world used to understand that they had come from their ancestors and that their descendants would come from them. And they were just in the middle. And that way of looking at the world meant you looked at it with a great deal more respect than happens now. And it seems, I know there's an awful lot of people think that there's a great deal of woolly thinking about this, and, it's wish fulfillment and all the rest of it. No, it's not. It's all eminently practical stuff.
Yeah.
Because the I don't think they worshipped the ancestors. I think that they revered them because they had given them the tools to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a practicality.
Absolutely. And I think that I know like many of my people also do ancestral healing work.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I'm at the end of a matriarchal line, so I'm the last woman from my mum. That whole we're going back that line, so I'm working on that thread. But that wasn't the point of what I was going to say. The point is that there is that deep understanding. If you're looking to any Indigenous culture that is in the world today, they are practicing some kind of engagement with the
Yes,
ancestors.
absolutely. Yeah.
And that people here, when that is not in place, are missing so much. What I see the Eightfold Year as being is very clearly a map. It gives us a map for how we can live as humans.
Yes.
We take all of these interpolations and we actually understand how it is to live as a human in today's world.
Yeah.
And therefore there is a continuity of culture, but all the while we're creating culture. And if we don't understand how to be human, then the culture that we're creating is probably not a very good one.
Well, it becomes divorced from locale.
Yeah.
And once it's divorced from locale, it's rootless. And if it's like one of the great things that's happened over the past couple of months is that people have stopped buying clothes for the sake of it. Now, why do you buy clothes for the sake of it? Because you get pleasure out of the act of buying it. But this is one of the problems that has led to incredible pollution across the world, and all this kind of thing, because you're being driven towards that by ideas that are coming in from outside.
Yeah.
And that's all right if you've got ideas locally to ground you. But if you don't have ideas that ground you in your community and in your sense of self within that community, then all of this stuff is, well, it's a little more than nonsense, and it's just distraction.
Yeah.
And I would go so far as to say an awful lot of what comes in is anti-culture,
Yeah.
in a sense, because everything is about what's new.
Mm.
Whereas all Indigenous societies understand that if you didn't ken what's old, you're not going to be around to know what's not new.
Yeah.
What is new. I mean, you're not going to be around because you have to understand your place in the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's that understanding of place that is what we should be building on.
Yeah. And very clearly, when you talk about this rootlessness, we can see that that is an endemic in the modern society. People feel rootless. And they're all, I see, and particularly was my own experience when I was going through that kind of phase, was that I was looking externally for some kind of place to be rooted, because we don't believe that we can be, when all the time, when anything was to come back home, was really, really a big process of actually what that means is right here on this land that tells the same stories as the language I speak, all of that kind of stuff. So that's an important piece for folk. What about people? I mean, I know that many of my people have a long ancestry that's not on the land that they're living on. So
Yeah.
there'll be people living on stolen land in America and Canada. They'll maybe have a mixed ancestral history. So they might be Nordic and British, and other European strands in there, as well as other places coming in. What do you think this could mean to them in terms of understanding their culture and their history? How could they go about doing that?
Well, I think that one of the things that I have learned from American society, which gets an awful lot of criticism, but one of the things that made me rethink quite a lot was the importance of churches over there, because churches are communities,
Mm-hmm.
and you can rebuild a community. because not every community on the planet goes back 5,000-10,000 years. People are forced to move. Things do happen. Disasters happen. We do know that, sadly, war has become more dominant over the past 5 millennia. But things do change, and people have to build where they are. But if their culture is strong, that will help them do that. And even if you have to build a new culture, as long as you do it around the community, and I would say you root it in a sense of place, then it can be redone. Not everything has to be ancient. It's the process that matters, the continuity. And I believe it is possible to start new cultures and then let them develop their own continuity as well. And if you come from, like you've got, one ancestor from Africa, another one from Norway, and one from Dundee, just to add in a bit of real class, you've got an awful lot of things that you can go and learn from. You have got, well, it's like, in a way, everybody should be taught first day they go to school that their ancestry is every bit as old as everybody else's. Just because the king and the rich man have written theirs down doesn't mean to say that they've got any more predecessors than you. They don't. You are as ancient in your antecedents as anybody on the planet.
That's really important.
It's absolutely important for people to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the situation where an awful lot of my work in history has been looking at how history has been changed and distorted, and lies have been told, and all the rest of it. And it'd be very easy to just get angry all the time about it. But as I'm going through and learning about these things, what I'm also learning about is that somehow the stories have survived because people keep them going. It's like the winner writes the history, but does everybody else shut up? No. And the winners only notice what happens in the big places. They don't know what's happening in the wee places where people survive and keep talking to each other. And people remember things. I mean, it's in the book, but there's a fabulous thing happened on the telly. They were up in Orkney trying to figure out how they moved the megaliths. And they had expert archaeologists, engineers, a big team of people, a lot of ropes, a lot of rollers, and they were having an awful time. So the local lad, Alan Tulloch, wanders over now and says, well, I was always told to just use seaweed. Whoosh. A major archaeological puzzle solved like that because it was a local person who knew what he was talking about. And, of course, they ignored it. It was the most important thing in the program, and they ignored it. But people noticed.
This is just so important. It's that sense of proper democracy. Right?
Well, yeah.
That's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Completely in action. And it's just having faith that what you know, as you say, that story that your granny told you is actually worthy and important.
And also that some of the stories that your granny told you have been around for as long as human beings have been around. And there's somebody over in North Japan getting told the same story at the same time you are. It's dressed differently. It's come out of a different culture, but it's the same story because fundamentally we're all human.
Yeah, yeah. The origins came from the same place. We just spread out a wee bit, right?
Yeah.
So it's exciting to me that we're rebuilding this, we're reclaiming, we're decolonising, we're doing all of that. I think we've covered most of the questions that I had written down. One of the things that I didn't ask you was, do you have a favourite location? Maybe that's in the book, or maybe it isn't in the book.
I've been asked this many a time, and when it comes to it, I basically say Scotland because there's so many, and I keep finding new things, and I keep going new places, and I keep coming and going, oh my heavens, how come I never knew about this before? And it tends, I would say if there is one, the one that pulls me strongest, because I've been able to see it out of my window in my last house and out of my front garden now that I'm down here. And that's the Paps of Fife, the Lowland Hills. They are in my eye line most days, if not every day. And I've found out, in fact, doing the work there has led to understanding a great deal more about a lot of other places. And it was looking at them, 20 years ago, that made me realise, why did I constantly head off into the islands or, up into the mountains? There was people here.
Right.
And there, in some, like in the Paps of Fife, it pulls together all of the different strands of continuous culture that I would say are important in the geomythographical approach. So I would say probably, the Paps of Fife, And I'm also painting them occasionally nowadays.
Fantastic. I love it. And I think that really speaks to the kind of work that we do, because the work that we do, all my folk, and I'm constantly bringing it back to the very personal, direct experience. Yeah. Right. So we're working with symbolism. So there's already something coming in here between that. But if that is completely abstracted, the connection is diluted. To some degree. So, in Scotland, we have these really spectacular monuments that get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
They get a lot of tourists, they get a lot of visitors. But then you go somewhere smaller, more local, and actually the richness of connection, the depth of it increases.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, I've been at this, I don't even want to think how long, but I am constantly finding new material and new things in the landscape, but also in books. I'm constantly looking up wee books that were written by people about their local area. And they know things, and they talk about things that get ignored by the institutions, shall we say. Yeah. So there's one of the great things about doing this kind of work is that it's constantly exciting. It really is. It's fun. I don't think I'd do it if it wasn't.
Of course. I love it. So what's the most important thing? What do you think the key message is for folk to take away from this book and this work?
I would say, from my point of view, and Dougie and I are slightly different on this, it is the understanding, and we would agree on this, that the understanding that there is a continuity of culture that can be discerned from certainly the Bronze Age, probably the Stone Age, right through into historical times, the time of generally reckoned as the Pictish times, that there are quite clear and obvious cultural continuities in that. And that means that we should be revisiting Scottish history with lots of new attitudes because of that. It's not chopped up into periods. History never was. That's something that is done for the convenience of scholars. But in Scotland, that continuity, to me, sometimes for a joke, I say to people, well, fundamentally, it doesn't matter because we're all Picts. But that's what people thought. If you look the length and breadth of Scotland, you will find that in the 18th and 19th centuries, all different kinds of sites were called Picts. They were built by the Picts because people believed these were their ancestors. And in the idea of the Picts, not the historically definable this or that, but in the idea of the Picts, we actually have something in Scotland that is the closest we've ever had to the idea of our national ancestors. And I think that idea reflects the continuity that we are illustrating in the book.
I love it. It just really pleases me. And what there was mention of in the book, because obviously this is quite intrinsic in terms of the landscape here, is this cultural memory of the Picts morphing into this, what we call the fairies, but we're not calling the fairies as in, that early 20th century idea of the wee Tinkerbells that were going about. And that was really new to me, this real sense that this cultural memory of ancestry has come from a kind of very vague sense of way, way back people, through to the idea that's much more easily graspable in terms of the Pictish people, those first millennium people, and then coming through that kind of Middle Ages and onwards into that kind of 18th century, 19th century stuff about the fairies. And I have to admit, I always kind of dismissed talk of fairies because I was kind of associating it with that kind of Victorian idea of what the fairies were. And that was something that was really new to me. And I think it was coming in with the work that we were doing together. But then this book really, I got really excited at this notion.
Yeah. It's places, the Sheehan, the fairy mounds, so many of which are, man-made of one kind or another, and the association with them and where you find fairies. And one of the things that because I look for places where I can discern community, whenever I hear that there's supposed to be fairies someplace, I want to have a look. I want to have a look. What else is there? And then, as often as not, you find out there is something else.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in our local, not in Uddingston here, but in Bothwell, which is the village next to us, they've got Fairy Now Place, and it's right next to where the old church is, and that was one of the first, I think, I can't remember what century, but one of the first churches dedicated to Bride. Not one of the first churches dedicated to Bride, but the church that's there was one that it was dedicated to Bride. It now isn't, and it's grown through very many variations. I don't know which current church owns it, but it's a very old graveyard. It's very old, and it's built in that kind of medieval section of the wee village. And of course, we've got the wells, we've got Bride, we've got the fairies. All of this stuff is going on. So I know that there's stuff there. What I have to do is get myself up to the Historical Society and start speaking to some of the folk that might have some of the stories. And we've been going out, because obviously Bothwell's quite a significant site in terms of the castle and all of the land around. And then we've got Châtellerault up there, and we've got Rockhart that's been found up there, and we've got the oaks, the big oak groves from Bruce's time. So there's so much going on here. And before I had taken your geomythography course, there was nothing to grasp onto. It was just like, well, there's nothing here. We're just heavily developed Lanarkshire industrial landscape. But then you start looking at all of these clues, and the evidence is right there.
Yeah. Is the church still on a mound?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
That's absolute. If it's pre-Reformation, it was on a mound.
Yeah.
It's almost absolutely guaranteed that it was in use before the Christians came.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got your local centre.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, you can actually, once you begin to see these, you see that they're actually at the heart of where everything is grown from. Because that's where everybody used to go.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about it, here we were saying, okay, so whatever that, I can't remember, as I say, what century that actual building is, but there's a really, really old part of it. Like we've got that wee graveyard so that's how I'm saying, yeah, it definitely is on a mound, because like you fall down the graveyard, all the stones are falling, and that's right next to Fairy Now, and I'm like, this is what is actually a street name now, and a car park and stuff like that, right? Because that's the world we live in. But that's all there. It gets really exciting, and we're like, so where were the people? The reason that they're burying people here is likely because they were having some kind of ancestral burial activity here. It makes sense, it's high up, you're over the glen. That's kind of where my associations are going anyway. And I think that's, when I'm saying, one of my questions that I had kind of pre-prepared was, what can people do after reading this book?
I think that we're hoping that people will understand that the continuities that we're expressing in this are actual, and that it will give people stimulus to go out into their own landscape, look at things, but also try and remember the stories that they heard as children, speak to people, talk to each other, because quite often there's an odd thing that happens that parents never have the time to teach the children all the stories that grandparents do. Grandparents have more time. And if I've got a family that's been living in the same place for a long time, quite often stories kind of come down through the family line that it's only what my granny told me. But if it was her granny that told her, and her granny that told her, and her granny that told her, and so far back, there can be stories that refer to things in the landscape that can be extremely exciting, and it's opening yourself up to the possibility of this, because we know. I mean, I'm now claiming that there's a very strong chance that some of the stories that are told and still told came out of Africa with the first humans.
Yeah.
So we're looking at incredible continuities.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And I think it's so human and it's so rooted in human that we can't help but be interested and fascinated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing is that a lot of this stuff is great for kids.
Right. You know, I'm thinking because when I was growing up, I was so fascinated by fairy stories, but it was mine were Hans Christian Andersen. I was on, and I've got my book there from when I was a bairn, and Arthur Rackham's illustrations. That was where my thing, and it's sad to me that I didn't ever get the Scottish version.
Well, we just have to make sure that we keep at it. I mean, I've put out about 15 different collections of Scottish stories, and what has been absolutely wonderful has been the number of different storytellers that have come up with me and say, "Thanks, Stuart," because they used them.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of what we do is recycling the culture, and by doing that, you keep it dynamic. Yeah.
And we want that because we can't be static. We can't be, I love a wee bit of reenactment, but right, in terms of how we live our life, as you say, it affects us socially, politically, economically, medically. We've got all of that going on. So, what's next for you?
I had given myself basically a few months off to get on with some artwork because I've not been doing any artwork for a long, long time. But the problem is I've also got some music stuff to get done and out of the way. But I keep on getting dragged back to the landscape. There's all this stuff and there's all these maps on the computer and there's Google Earth. And so, I mean, it just goes on. I mean, I can't stop chasing after it. Though I'm trying to learn to take things a bit easier. Let's put it that way, and pace myself. But no, there are two things that I will mention. One is Sleeping Wifey, and the other is the Drappet Lippin. And these are beginning to figure in my dreams.
Wow. Nice. Well, I personally cannot wait to get in and about this in more detail. As you know, I was totally hook, line and sinker from that first presentation at the library. I too don't have enough time to do what I want to do with it because I'm having to make money to earn a living. So, unfortunately, but being able to build this into that work is like the best thing ever. So I wanted to be another person to say thank you for that, because you're allowing me to actually put out work that is in full integrity with my own personal experience.
Great.
So
I'm pleased with that.
Ain't that
And I
great?
should just say that if the university does go back next year, I'll be teaching the course again.
Brilliant.
You know?
Love it. And I would recommend that to everybody. And
Thank you very much.
yes, oh no, absolutely, highly recommended. I think I marked you really well on that feedback form. I think that's everything. I think we've covered quite a lot.
I think we have.
Yeah, yeah, it's super interesting to me. Thanks so much for giving up your time.
Absolutely my pleasure. And you take care.
You too. I'm going to end our recording.